Hey everybody, Wandering Pastor coming to you again today with part 2 of my series on American Idols. And as I said before, I'm taking this from a book that I wrote about 3 years ago called American Idols: The American Church's Compromise and How to Correct Course. If you're not a Christian, you might think this isn't for you, but the reality is this idol that I'm going to talk about today has shown up in every area of our lives, in everybody's life. And I believe it is the number one idol that we deal with. Now, what do I say? What do I mean when I say idols? Because after all, we don't worship statues like they used to in the Old Testament time, right? We don't. We don't bow down to statues, or at least in most cases we don't. We instead do things like put other things, ourselves, our opinions, other people, our desires, anything before God. And that's an idol. When you give God's rightful place to something else, God, who is the creator of all, who is the ruler of the universe, who is the creator of everything, who holds everything together, God, who is the very definition of love and of goodness and of holiness and of perfection and of sovereign wisdom, that God, when you put any other thing before him, that is idolatry. And what I say in this book is that there is one idol more than anything else that shows up in our lives, in our culture especially, and to shows up as an idol. And I'm just going to share with you what I believe that idol is. There is an idol I think comes before all others in our world, and that is the idol of self. Self has become one of the primary gods of this age. An overemphasis on self, self-respect, self-image, self-satisfaction can often lead to self-indulgence, selfishness, self-serving, and self-centeredness. And that's where, whether you're a Christian or not, whether you're a person who goes to church and says you believe in God or not, you've got to look at and see if this is accurate. Because our world, and our culture in particular, I believe, is obsessed with self. And it teaches us that unless you become obsessed with self and look out for number one and make your goal your own fulfillment or your own satisfaction, then you will lose it and you will miss out. And so it almost becomes an excuse for you to be self-centered. And that, of course, is self-destructive. It's also destructive to our culture, and it's destructive to our world. Now, if you add to that has infiltrated into the lives of Christians and into many churches, most churches, because we all deal with it, then we understand how destructive it can be, even for those who claim to know and love and worship God. So self has become a major problem in our culture. Now, to a certain extent, that's been the case from the dawn of creation. Adam and Eve in Genesis chapter 1, 2, and 3, Adam and Eve in particular chapter 3, they basically said they're going to go their way and say no to God's way. And that's what really started the whole cycle of sin, right? The downward spiral of sin, where mankind said, no, God, I know you said to do this, but I want to do this. And once we started that, and we all do it, then sin just became rampant in our lives, and it becomes focused on self. And so I want to challenge you to really think about, is this a mindset that has been helpful or not? And I believe it hasn't been. I believe it's been much more destructive than it has been helpful or healthy. And some will right away say, yeah, but you got to look out for self. You got to love yourself first. And I just reject that altogether. The self-first mindset is what leads us who claim to be followers of Jesus to live as though we're not. We're not followers of Jesus. It has also affected our relationship with God to the extent that we end up requiring God to fit our own agenda. We treat our faith and the Word of God almost as a cafeteria plan, picking and choosing as we see fit. And so again, the book American Idols, I talk about this idol, but many others. And I'm going to talk about a few more of those over the coming videos. But I really want to challenge you on this idol of self. And here's here's how to contrast that with what Jesus said. And it's kind of some of the famous words of Jesus, where he was asked in Matthew chapter 22, he was asked, "Teacher, what is the greatest commandment in the law?" The law being the law of Moses, the Old Testament teaching about God, about how to relate to God and how to know God and obey God and so on. And Jesus replied, "Love the Lord your God with all your heart, all your soul, and all your mind. This is the first and greatest commandment. And the second is like it. Love your neighbor as yourself. All the law and all the prophets hang on these two commandments." That's Matthew 22, 36 through 40. Now, here's the thing, what we do in our culture nowadays. And we started it back in about the 1970s, and it's just become more entrenched and more ingrained now. We take those two commandments, love God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength, love your neighbor as yourself, and we focus on those last two words, as yourself. We start to build a whole theology around what does it mean to love yourself. And we have developed magazines and psychologies and courses and books and whole sections of bookstores and libraries that are all about self-love. And until we get beyond that, we will never be able to love God the way we should. And here's what I mean by that. See, God is always asking us, and it has been from the very beginning, those who are his followers in particular, to abandon self and worship him instead. In other words, you can't love self as number one and love God with all your heart, soul, and mind at the same time. You can't do it. You have to make a choice. I either say I want to love God first or I love myself. Love myself first. Those are the things we do. Now, does God think you're junk? Does God think you're trash? No, of course not. He created you. He knows you. He loves you. He wants the best for you. But the best for you is to put him first, to love God more than anything else. And here's what Jesus said in Luke chapter 9. He said, "If any one of you," beginning in verse 23, "if one of you would come after me, he must deny himself and take up your cross daily to follow me. For whoever wants to save his life will lose it, but whoever loses his life for my sake will find it." So Jesus counteracts that self-love thing right away, where he says, if anyone wants to follow after me, he must deny himself. And that's the opposite of what we see in our culture. That's the opposite of what we even see in our churches. I mean, think about this. When the next time you go to a church service, certainly participate in the worship singing, but listen to the theme of the worship songs. What has become increasingly common is that even our worship songs are about me. Even our worship is about what God does for me, how God makes me feel, how my life is better. Now, is there truth to that? Of course there is truth to that. And I think it's legitimate, personally. I think it's legitimate to sing a song that says, Lord, you complete me. Lord, you give me life. Lord, you are all, you are the best I want for myself. There's certainly there's a legitimate part of that. But when that becomes our focus of worship, which is supposed to be getting me off of myself and onto the Lord and focusing on him and giving him the praise that only he is due, then I got a real problem. And that, I believe, is one of the biggest reasons that the church has lost any sort of impact and any sort of power to influence our culture, is because we've become very much like our culture. We're self-focused. So, American idols, the number one idol in our culture today, and even in many of our churches, is self. And I really want to challenge you and encourage you to get off of that. So I want you to think about that, pray about that, ask God to show you if that's true. And certainly, if you have any questions or comments about this, any disagreements even, by all means, email me at wanderingpastor@gmail.com. You can certainly comment on any of these. And if you think these are worthwhile, please like it and share it to other people. Okay? Let's get back to worshiping God as number one, loving him first and foremost, okay? That's the best way to live. That's the only real way to live, all right? Wandering Pastor saying peace to you.